welcome to episode 81 of our weekly CRICKETher Vodcast. Well, the cricket season is done and dusted here in England, so we are back at home with our green screen, whatever we decide to make the background this week. Now, a couple of hours ago, the result is in of the India v Australia test. What's the result, Sid?
The result is a draw, an exciting, glorious draw.
What did you make of it all?
I think it's got to be a little bit disappointing again. I think for me, actually, India killed the game very, very early on. India never went at a run rate. Certainly after the first little bit, they never went at a run rate which was going to give them an opportunity to win the game in this day and age, in the 21st century, in 2021 or whenever we are. And I accept that India's scoring rate was high by historical standards, and it was high by the standards of men's tests. But these are women's tests; they're played under different conditions. If you want to win a women's test, you need to score a faster rate than a little bit more than 2 and over that India did for almost all their innings. And they took so much time to score their runs that realistically there was never going to be time for them to bowl Australia out twice. And that's what you got to do to win the tests. So for me, I think India have to accept quite a lot of responsibility for that result. How do you see it, Raf?
Well, I suppose I personally feel that Australia have to accept to be honest, more than their fair share of culpability. I cannot fathom why they won the toss and chose to put India in. If you win the toss in a men's test, then a lot of the time you bat first. If you win the toss in a women's test, you bat first. And the reason why is because it puts you in control of the game, and it means that you get to kind of almost set out in your head how the 4 days are going to go. Now, we knew before this test started that there was weather around and that they were unlikely to really get more than 3.5 days of this test at best. So if you win the toss, and if you say ahead of time, we're going to play positively, we're going to approach this game positively, and we're going to play like it's a one-dayer, well, it's no good doing that. It's no good saying that if you then don't get to bat until day 3, which is what happened to Australia. They put India in. It was a mistake. I don't care what bowling you've got. It was a mistake. So there's that. I think that the other problem was that Australia's strike rate was nowhere near what we would have expected to see if they really were going after the runs and if they really were batting like it was a one-dayer. If Alyssa Healy and Meg Lanning and Ash Gardner batted at a strike rate of below 50 in a one-day game, they'd be having a very stern talking to from Matthew Mott after they came off the pitch, and they'd certainly be getting a bit of they'd be done down in the media for that. It's easy to talk the talk ahead of a women's test. It's not as easy to walk the walk. So I don't think that you're criticising India for their strike rate. Well, I don't think Australia did what they said that they were going to do. And it was obviously a reaction to the last women's test that they played in 2019 at Taunton, when they did get a lot of criticism for their negative approach and their negative tactics. So they went, okay, well, we're going to, say that we're going to do things a bit differently. But in practice, they didn't really. They didn't ever put themselves in a position where they were going to be able to get anywhere near India's first innings total. And the decision at the toss was just a bit bizarre, to be honest. So, that's what I think. There's obviously a lot of talk now around should there be a 5th day, and I think we probably even talked about this on the Vodcast when it came down to the India test that England played earlier in the summer, Sid. So shall we revisit that conversation in light of that? Any thoughts on a 5th day?
Yeah, Meg Lanning said in post-match that she felt that if there'd been a 5th day, there would have been a result. If there'd been a 5th day and a 6th day, if there'd been a timeless test, there'd have been a result. I think that still remains slightly ducking the issue for me. What do you feel, Raf?
Yeah, well, I think I'll say what I probably said exactly then, is that my concern about saying, oh, well, women's tests need to be 5 days. I'm very sympathetic to that perspective, and if it was up to me, they would be. But we need to get into a position where more countries are playing more women's tests more often. And if we say from the outset they have to be 5 days, then you're putting another barrier in, that prevents that potentially. So I don't think that just banging on about women's test being 5 days is particularly helpful. Both countries always go into a women's test knowing that it's going to be 4 days, and you generally know because they follow the weather forecast. They know that there's likely to be rain. Whenever there's a test played in England, we always know there's going to be some rain.
And there always is.
Yeah, and
fair.
now there is in Australia as well. I mean, it does rain sometimes over there. Shocking as it may seem to those of us in the UK who think that it's like Neighbours all the time and it's a kind of dreamless, dreamy paradise of just endless, gorgeous golden beaches. Well, it does rain there occasionally. Anyway, so I think that it's not really about the fifth day. For me, I think it's about the fact that in the professional era of women's cricket, teams have lost the art of the competitive declaration.
Okay, well that's an interesting perspective, Raf. I certainly remember from watching men's county cricket in the 70s and 80s, the old, the conversations they'd have about declarations. And interestingly, actually, the commentators were talking about those kinds of conversations today during the match. They were saying, well, if I was Meg Lanning, I'd have gone round to Mitali Raj's dressing room door and knocked on the door and said, what are we going to do? But that obviously isn't a thing that they feel comfortable doing. I think it is one of those things where, we kind of as a sport do feel a little bit uncomfortable with kind of cooking up results in that way these days. And even in the 70s, actually, if you remember the 70s and 80s, at the time, people didn't admit that's what they were doing. You could see that they were kind of going towards a declaration situation, when they'd get on old Larry Smith to bowl a few overs who, trundled down, his off spinners that never spun more than a millimetre, and, they hit 70 off 6 of his overs and then declared, and you go, okay, well, that's been something but we always assumed back then that, that was something done in a sporting way, not that the two captains had got together and go, well, we'll bowl Larry Smith, mate, and then you get 70 off that over, and then we're all good to go. We're all cushy. They all spoke like that in the 70s. If you weren't in the 70s, you don't remember.
They were all from Essex in the 70s.
Actually, most of the people winning the county championship were from Essex in the 70s and 80s. I thought they were from South. Anyway, I digress.
You do.
Yes. So 5 days. Well, I think we've cooked that one, Raf. We've cooked that goose. What's next?
Well, a week ago, we were at Canterbury. We were recording our vodcast and we did it ahead of the 5th and final ODI between New Zealand and England. Now, as it turned out, a lot of our criticism about the England batting actually fell a little bit short in that last game because England really were very dominant, as they hadn't been for most of that series. So, any final reflections overall on that England v New Zealand series, Sid?
Well, it all came together for them at the last, didn't it? The batting just clicked really nicely, and that was the performance that everyone had been waiting for. It had been the performance that England had been saying, that they have within them. They obviously want to try and make that happen a little bit more often, but if they can produce that kind of performance in a World Cup final against Australia, they've got a very good chance of winning it. So I think that what you ultimately learn from that is, you still can't write England off against anything. Are England a better side overall than Australia? No.
Do you mean New Zealand?
No, than Australia.
Oh, Australia, okay.
Are England a better side than Australia? No, they're not.
Okay.
But are England a side that have the potential when they click to beat even sides like Australia and India? Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I think that they'll feel, that they've kind of set down a little bit of a marker there.
Cool. And it was nice to see Tammy Bowman making 100 in front of her kind of home crowd, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. She's been fantastic this year again, and one of the best players in the world at the moment, no doubt about that, Raf.
Okay.
Talking of the best players, we had this week the Cinch PCA Cricketer of the Year awards. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but apparently they're the biggest awards in British cricket, or in English cricket, or English and Welsh cricket, or something. And you published a piece in The Guardian based on some interviews that you did there. I guess, Rash, that was a lavish dinner with lashings of champagne and eaten mess for pudding. What was it like?
Yeah, not quite. So Eve Jones did her interview over Zoom from the Costa Coffee at Heathrow Airport. So she was obviously having a lavish cappuccino or whatever from Costa to celebrate her award. No, but in all seriousness, congratulations to her and congratulations to Alice Capsey, who was the young female cricketer of the year, I think it was. I think that's a new award for this year, and both of those
very much deserved.
Yeah, and both voted for actually by other cricketers. So quite a nice one to pick up because it shows the regard with which somebody like Eve Jones is held by her fellow
her peers.
Yeah, her peers, exactly.
And Alice Capsey, of course, not even a member of of the Professional Cricketers Association, because not technically a professional cricketer at this
Yeah,
stage.
yeah, it was quite funny, wasn't it? Apparently the PCA had kind of got together and said, well, is she going to be eligible for this because she's not a member? And they decided that she would be. And then the vote had gone in her favour.
Right decision.
So fair enough. It's obviously been a fantastic season for her. And it was one of the interesting things, actually, was talking to her, was that she's already making preparations for potential selection for that England A tour. In Australia in January, so she's front loading all of her schoolwork so that most of it happens before December. I didn't really realise that was possible, but apparently it is. So she's doing that. So she's obviously reasonably confident of selection for that, and I think that's totally fair enough because her name is being bandied around for full England selection. So why wouldn't she make it on that A tour? It's been interesting actually to hear that. That Lisa Kiteley, for example, is very confident that that A tour is going to go ahead. We'd begun to be slightly concerned, maybe a little bit worried that that might fall by the wayside because of all these kind of COVID complications, with Australia having higher rates and all these things about quarantining when you're travelling between states and things like this. Now, you know, even the most optimistic assessment, COVID isn't going to suddenly disappear before January, but Lisa Kiteley is obviously very hopeful that that tour will go ahead and actually that they'll be able to some extent mix and match between the full England side playing the Women's Ashes and the England A side playing the Australia A side. So she kind of said, oh, well, it allows us to take more players and have, you know, kind of delay some of those decisions that would otherwise be very difficult. That's a brilliant opportunity for Eve Jones, I think, you know, who has been kind of knocking on the door of England, you would think, for many years, scoring so many runs in domestic cricket and never having previously got a look in. And she did sort of talk about being a little bit frustrated about that. So I think it's fantastic for everyone, really, and quite exciting to think about this England A tour going ahead. I only wish that we could get over to Australia, but sadly probably not going to be possible under current conditions.
Yeah, the A tour is definitely going to be a fabulous opportunity. I think there are still questions to be answered about exactly how it goes ahead. I think there's still something at the back of my mind nagging that it's at the last minute they're going to cancel it and go, look, sorry guys, COVID. But assuming it does go ahead, I still think it's that the other option is to kind of run them totally separately. So we've got currently the Australia-India series all going ahead in one state. I think that's quite likely that will also happen for the Women's Ashes, and that therefore the A tour, if it goes ahead, will have to go ahead in a different state, which will mean that they have to select two completely separate squads. That's actually kind of some good news for the people in the A tour, though, because it means that the people in the A tour will get genuine opportunities. Because the one thing that still concerns me about the sort of mix and match approach is that what England will do is use the A tour to give consolation games to people that are in the senior squad but aren't selected for that. And that's, for me, that's not what the A tour is for. The A tour is for, you know, getting solid experience for your Grace Scrivens and your Alice Capseys, not about giving a consolation game to someone that might have otherwise been playing in the senior team but just missed out on selection by one place.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, but huge congratulations to Eve Jones and to Alice Capsey. And finally this week, there's been an article published in the Times relating to the schedule for next year's 100 competition, and that described it was about the scheduling, and the ECB have apparently said that the 100 for 2022, the second iteration, will have a prime 5-week slot. Now, the spanner in the works there, because there is a spanner, let's be honest, there's always a spanner. The spanner on this occasion is a little thing called the Commonwealth Games, which is happening in 2022 between 28th of July and 8th of August. Now, that's going to be a little bit of a potential spanner in terms of that schedule for the 100, Sid.
Yeah, so the ECB have essentially made 3 points. None of these have been really sort of formal announcements. They've all kind of leaked out through various interviews people have done, but they've said 3 things really clearly. Number one, they've said that we will maintain the double header model and that the men's and women's competitions will run concurrently with double headers. The second thing that they've said is that they will run it in prime time.
Okay.
So that to me says school holidays.
Yep.
The third thing they said is that it will be a 5-week competition.
Yep.
Aha. Now, if the Commonwealth Games doesn't finish until, you know, when you're pretty realistically looking at 10th, 11th of August at the very best, in order to get that competition started. Then your 5 weeks pushes you well into September, at which point you're no longer in prime time. You're in school. You're in school term time in this country.
Should we say when the summer holidays normally are?
Yeah, so the summer holidays usually finish but at the end of August, pretty much.
Yeah.
So once you're into September, you're basically into school time.
Yeah.
And we're actually looking at the second week in September at that point, which means you're well into school time, because some of the very posh schools actually go back a week or so later than the state schools. So even if you're at the very poshest schools, that's still going to be hitting your ability to be able to take your family to those games, and particularly obviously the final.
Yeah.
The final taking place well into school term time. So the ECB, they've got a little bit of a thing where I think the left hand doesn't quite know what the right hand is doing with these announcements, and they clearly don't know at this stage exactly when they're going to schedule the 100 and how it's all going to work. And there are big questions to answer. The most obvious answer to all this is to go, well, we'll run the women's 100 concurrently with the Commonwealth Games. And the men's 100 as well. Now, there is a lot of issues there. I mean, even if you just think about the men's 100, there's the issue of, what about Edgbaston? Does that mean that for the first 2 weeks of the competition that the Birmingham Super Phoenixes or whatever they are can't have any home games? Who knows? But there are other issues with this, aren't there, Raf? Including issues with the overseas players.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say that one of the frustrating things about this is that so many of these media articles just totally ignore the Commonwealth Games. It's like they've forgotten that it's happening, despite the fact that to us it's like the biggest thing to happen in women's cricket for, well, I don't know, in quite a long time.
The players are incredibly excited about the Commonwealth Games.
Well, of course you would be, because it's an opportunity to win a gold medal or even a silver medal in a global event that's just gets so many eyes on it. And I think that does relate to a problem that the ECB has, because the 100 is kind of billed as this huge visibility opportunity for women's cricket. Well, the Commonwealth Games is bigger than the 100. I'm sorry, but there's no getting around it. It is. It's a global event. Of course, it only involves the countries of the Commonwealth, so it's not as big as the Olympics. But still, every match of the Commonwealth Games will be on the BBC. Now, of course, we had some matches in the 100 on the BBC, and that was very much seen as a positive and a brilliant thing. But this will literally be back-to-back women's cricket matches on the BBC, on free-to-air TV. It will be kind of being shown alongside all these other events, so it will be bringing in new viewers to women's cricket who don't necessarily follow women's cricket outside of the Commonwealth Games. And it will be viewers from all around the country, from all around the world. So not just people in England who are interested in the 100. It will be viewers from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Caribbean. Everywhere around the world who has a team in the Commonwealth Games will be really interested and will be engaging with this competition. So if the ECB want to try and run the women's 100 up against the Commonwealth Games, they're on a hiding to nothing there. Absolutely they are. All they're doing would be to shoot themselves in the foot and to massively undermine the fact that the 100 is meant to be this big visibility opportunity for women's cricket. So I really hope that doesn't happen. I think it's unlikely, because I think they must be aware of everything that I've just said. And that therefore does mean that what you're up against is, you either run the 100 either side of the Commonwealth Games, in which case, what do you do with all of these overseas players who are floating around in the middle going, what do I do for a few weeks if I'm not necessarily selected for the Commonwealth Games, which they won't all be. And obviously the men's overseas players have nothing to do with the Commonwealth Games, so quite an expensive undertaking, you'd think, to just keep them here. Or, as you say, you backload it into September, but then it does clash with this suggestion that the whole thing's going to be in a prime time slot. So yeah, as you say, is the left hand talking to the right hand? There's a bit of an issue with overseas players as well, generally, isn't there, Sid?
Yeah, because of course it's not just the England players that wouldn't be participating, it's the Indian players and the South African players and the Barbadian players, and that takes out an awful lot of the big overseas stars from this year. So, the kids in Northern Diamonds Land where will be going off to see Jemima Rodriguez, and it's like, no, she's not here. And the kids in London Spirit Land will be going off to see Deandra Dodson, and we're like, no, she's not here either. None of the England players are here. That's not how you run the supposedly the best women's cricket competition in the world. That's not going to work either. And again, the people at the ECB must know this, but there is a rather large circle there that needs to be squared, and someone's going to have to get out their hammer to do that. Well,
we're looking forward to seeing how they're going to do that, aren't we? I think that's pretty much all from us this week. Thanks for tuning in, as ever, and see you in a week's time.
Bye.
Bye.